Welcome to From Data to Victory.
Welcome back to From Data to Victory with political strategist Fairalee Carrier, founder of Republican Political Consulting, LLC, serving campaigns across Massachusetts and Texas. Fairalee helps candidates and voters understand how government and campaigns actually function, beyond headlines and campaign promises. I'm Lisa Mosby, your host, and today we're talking about why understanding the office you're running for matters, what that office realistically controls, and how misunderstandings here create problems long before Election Day. Welcome, Fairalee. Thanks for being with me today.
Hi, how are you? So good to see you again.
Thank you. Fairalee, why do so many candidates run for office without fully understanding what that position actually has the authority to do?
This is a great topic and question, first of all, because so many people think they want to run for office, but they don't understand what authority that office actually has. Voters many times do not understand the authority of the elected seat. So before we even start a campaign, when we are hired, we make sure that the candidate understands what their boundaries are. For example, I've assisted on presidential campaigns, but I haven't been a direct strategist for a POTUS candidate. But when the president says, I'm going to make sure that abortion is banned across the country, well, if you don't know any better and if you don't know basic civics, you wouldn't understand that the executive doesn't have that authority. I mean, that is a constitutional question that would either be handled an issue on Supreme Court or matters of health and safety under our Constitution are relegated to the states. So the president of the United States can't make each individual state, enact the law about banning something regarding health and safety. The abortion would fall under that category. It sounds really good to say, especially if you're trying to, you're in a primary situation and you know that you think you might have to be a little bit more radical, play more to a little bit more radical side of your party. Saying things like that might land very well. It might get people excited, but it's factually incorrect. So it's important that a congressional candidate knows that, hey, it's going to be your job to actually write the law that all of us have to follow. If you're a senator, it's going to be your job to do a lot of oversight. You're going to have to be involved in foreign affairs, perhaps. You're going to have to come in after Congress and ratify some bills. And it requires a higher level of comprehension sometimes to be a senator. So you have to know what power you're going to have in that seat. And that is one thing that we absolutely spend a lot of time on when strategizing for every campaign. For example, a mayor, their authority, what are their bounds? Most people know that the mayor is only in charge of the city or town. But if a mayoral candidate's messaging starts dip into national politics or even statewide politics, then you're not steering the voters in the right direction. You're essentially being inauthentic and lying to them. And what's going to happen is that voters who really do know the difference, they're going to look at you like you don't even know what the job description is, like you don't even know what authority you're going to have and not have if elected. So I'm not voting for you because you don't even know what you're doing. So you have those group of voters as well who are well informed and who can spot in an instant that this person does not know what they're talking about. So their conclusion will be they're saying this just to cater, radical side of the party, or they're just saying this because it sounds good. They don't know what they're talking about. And it's in that moment that you lose your credibility as a candidate.
So it's not just the candidate, it's also the voters having an understanding of how power is actually distributed across branches and levels. How does misunderstanding the scope of an office affect campaign messaging and expectations just right from the very beginning?
The short answers are you end up spending money in areas where you don't need to. We have to remember that campaigns are expensive. And if you're spending thousands of dollars on messaging about something that you will never have the authority to even speak on, or even like weigh in on, or ratify one way or the other, what are you doing? You've missed the boat. So it is the candidate's responsibility, in our opinion, to inform and educate their voters about what they can do. Because you have to say, oh, I'm running for Congress, I want to be your congressman. But voter might say, okay, that's cool. But they may think, due to lack of understanding or knowledge, that as a congressperson, you have the powers of the president. They may think that you have influence on the Supreme Court. They may you could go and tell their local mayor what to do as a congressman. So you have to be able to educate your voters and your constituents on what the job description is. It is absolutely, and we feel very strongly about this, it is the candidate's responsibility to make sure their voters know what the job is.
How do local, state, and federal offices differ when it comes to speed, influence, and the real world impact?
The differences between the three as an arrow. If you start at the federal level, it's going to be slower. When you get down to the local level, it's faster. So when you're running for local office, the results turn over because the voters can see there in their city, you said you were going to campaign to do XYZ, and now we see XYZ happening in our neighborhood, like within a couple of months. But when you're a congressman or a senator, it's hard for voters to remember you campaigned on trying to bring diversity to the school districts within your congressional district. Well, I know in Texas, we have lots of school districts, and those are separate elections, like people that are running for school district positions. So if you're a congressional candidate and you're talking about what needs to happen in the school districts, you might be able to meet with those elected representatives and influence, but you're not ultimately going to be able to solidify real change in the school district as a congressman. As a senator, you're, in my opinion, someone even more further removed from what the voter is going to experience on a day-to-day basis. However, a senator's job is so important because they work so hard in the background. They do all of the digging and the questioning and the investigations that really shape our nation. They're the ones who confirm presidential nominees for all these unelected bureaucrats, director of the CIA, director of the FBI, and they're the ones who are questioning these individuals in theory to protect the nation. They're doing oversight on foreign affairs and military conduct. And a lot of times the general public is not aware of how powerful senators can be because they can ultimately decide, Congress has said you could spend money here. You can go to war because in our country, you have to get a declaration of war from the president to the Congress, who has to approve, yes, we're going to war. But then the Senate can say, what about all these war crimes? What's going on? And that may or may not be something that the general public is aware of. But, things happen in government behind the scenes all the time. More things behind the scenes in government that the public will never realize. So you have to vote for people who you feel that you can say to yourself as a voter, I may not know all this stuff about government and how it works, but this is a man or this is a woman whose values and ethics, I believe, can have the capacity, gives him the capacity to make the right decision on my behalf.
So, speaking behind the scenes, what is the legislative process like committees, votes, and timelines matter? Why does that matter so much when evaluating campaign promises?
Because it goes directly to spending. Our taxpayer dollars, where they go, Congress is all in that. So if you care about where your tax money is going, you're going to want a congressman who cares about appropriations committee, oversight committees. Um, Rookie congressmen tend to end up in committees that aren't very popular, or like the committee over agriculture or the committee over science and technology. But then if they stay in office and sometimes they get moved to more committees, they get a lot of press, like the oversight committee, where lately it has seemed like a Real Housewives episode in the oversight committee. You have congressmen talking about how their bodies are built and eyelashes being worn, and calling people names and yelling and screaming. It kind of reminds me of like the British Parliament, how they get very animated in London and they start throwing things and they start jumping across tables. Our Oversight Congressional Committee has had their moments that kind of like speak to that history. But that's why you want a congressman who understands where these committees are, and government is one big ball of red tape. So you have to know as a candidate, if I get elected, I need to tell people this is my first time in Congress. So I don't know where I'm going to be positioned in Congress. It's unlikely that I'll end up on a committee that is going to have the authority to do what you care about as my constituents. But if I am, then you can trust that I'm definitely going to represent what you want. And if you continue to reelect me, and if I get to those committees that have the authority to do what is important for you in this country, then you can trust that I'm going to represent what you believe and what your values are from your district.
And in your experience, what tends to break down once someone takes office and realizes the limits of their authority?
This is a great question, because this goes back to hiring a good consultant like us who understand this big picture so that we can guide and consult you from the very beginning of your campaign. This way, you don't have to go back and take rehabilitative measures on your messaging, because you've started out the gate knowing the job description, knowing what you can and cannot do. And this allows you to actually spend more of your campaign time as a candidate connecting with the voter, because voters appreciate when you can say, hey, this is the issue I care about. I care about social justice. I care about these protests. And you can say as a congressional candidate, well, it would be my job to write the law in the country. I may or may not have influence over a certain committee that might get some way be connected to local law enforcement or how protests are managed, right? So if you want me to be in your camp about protesting, then I can say I agree with the reason for the protest. I can say whether or not First Amendment rights are being violated and try to introduce a bill that further protects your First Amendment right. But that would be all I could do as a congressman, So voters are emotional, candidates are emotional, but the candidate has to deploy some emotional maturity and objectivity. So that way you can be more authentic with your constituents. They can ask you questions and know that what you're telling them isn't political spin. It isn't lying to their face. You're letting them know up front, this is what I can't do that. I agree with you and I'm just as passionate with you on this issue. But in this particular office, there's nothing I can do about it except, maybe introduce a ceremonial bill that would put the issue on the national stage. But that's all I can do.
How does a clear understanding of government structure change the way candidates talk about solutions without overpromising?
So the answer to your question is actually in your question. If a candidate understands exactly what their role is, they will not overpromise during the campaign, because they will know that this is all I can do. I'm running for mayor because I'm passionate about my city. But I have no say on where your federal tax dollars go. You know, I have no authority on that. All I can do is if there's local taxes, state taxes, perhaps maybe I can go talk to the governor and let them know that, the city of Boston needs XYZ or the city of Houston needs XYZ. But I have no control over where your federal tax dollars, where they go, if they go to fund a war. As a mayor, that's way out of my lane. So that way, if you're as a candidate, you're making promises that you can keep. And that way your messaging on the campaign is absolutely limited to what authority you will have if elected.
And why is this knowledge just as important for the voters? How does the candidate make sure that the voters are aware of what they can and cannot do?
It's important for the voters because as a candidate, we believe that when you know the job description and you're able to articulate that and correct what the voter understands about the job to them directly to their face, it actually empowers the voter because now the voter is like, oh, so this is what you can really do. And this is what you actually can't do. So I want you to do this because you told me that you could do this. So I'm holding you accountable, Mr. Politician or Mrs. Politician, because you are very clear that this decision is within your wheelhouse and within your job description. So if you made a promise to me that you were going to fund a new high school, and we know that you have the final say on authorizing, if there's a dispute at the local level about how the architect that's going to be hired or the government contract that's going to be issued. If there's a dispute on which contractor gets it, and you know that you may have the last vote on who gets the contract, then why is the new high school not being built with the plans and the specs that you said it was going to look like in your campaign? So that might be a technical answer, but I'm trying to give visual examples so that the audience can understand that you as a voter, once you know what that politician can do, it empowers you. And we love educating voters because that's how people get more involved with politics. It's very easy to stay on your couch, watch the news, or be on social media and complain about what you're hearing, or these people are just liars. I can't trust what he's saying because he's a politician. When he opens his mouth, he's lying. A lot of people believe that as a voter. But candidates in today's age have a great opportunity to educate their voters about what their authority is. And then that in turn gives the voters power and more interest in the election, because now you've got something tangible that the voters can sink their teeth into and say, oh, I really care about this very nuanced issue. And I know that you would have the authority to make sure this happens. So I'm going to follow your campaign the whole time. And if you get elected, I'm watching you. I'm watching you because you said that you could do this. So that is the benefit of knowing the authority and educating the voters about what that is. You end up getting very engaged voters. Long story short.
Well said. And thank you, Fairalee. That's today's episode from Data to Victory with Fairalee Carrier. Understanding how power actually works is critical for realistic campaigns and informed voting. It's often where expectations and reality collide. Today, we've shared a lot of information about how this actually works in the real world. To learn more about what Fairalee's work with candidates in Massachusetts and Texas is, please visit Fairalee.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to leave a review.
Thank you so much. It's always fun. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.